Trek favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is a show where you get to hear from some of my friends and hopefully some of your friends about one of their favorite Star Trek episodes. You probably know the rules by now. It doesn't have to mean anything in particular. It just has to be a Trek favorite from any Star Trek series. This time, I'm really delighted to welcome Elle Newman back, for the first time to Trek Favorites. We've talked on my other show, Mac Voices, plenty of times. And Elle, I just saw you at MacStock.
Yeah, it's so good to see you again already, Chuck.
Yeah, it's a delight to have you.
Oh, and I'm so happy to be back. I'll
Yeah, one way
or
or
not
another.
back to Star
Yeah,
Trek, but I'm
yeah.
I'm happy to be back podcasting with you again.
Good. Well, it's great to have you. You have a little bit different, I guess, background here when it comes to Star Trek, and I'll let you explain so that I don't try to put words in your mouth.
Okay, well, good luck with that, anyways. Yeah, so especially for a show such as this, I imagine it'll be a different background, just in the fact that I'm not as long term of a Star Trek fan as probably most of your guests. Or if not as long term, at least I just haven't been diving in for as long. And I can explain. I first knew about Star Trek back in college with The Next Generation. And and I suppose before then I knew because I remember for some reason, my mom taught me Spock's salute, and so I knew the Vulcan salute growing up, but I had no context. um, and then in college, I watched it. When I rewatched TNG, I realized that I had gotten almost every episode at one point. I remembered most of them, but it wasn't. I watched it with friends, and not actual Friends, not the TV show. Um, but it wasn't something that I was making a huge effort to see on my own as much as I enjoyed it. And I certainly wasn't reading about it. I saw a couple of the movies, but I can't even tell you which ones they were right now. But I, um, recently I watched Enterprise because Oh, I had a cheat sheet with all of the different seasons in front of me, Chuck, and now I'm gonna have to drop back. The new one, did I goof that up? Discovery is the new one.
Discovery, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So Brett and I watched Discovery and I really enjoyed it, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I had so little context for it that it was like the second season before I understood where in the timeline it was. Like I was watching it trying to figure out how we got from Next Generations to now we had this huge war at the beginning of it and like what could have possibly happened in between. And I enjoyed the story, but didn't yeah, I wasn't as hooked as I got recently when finally I just needed some context. So I looked up like you'd think that maybe somebody would do this at the beginning. So I'm just letting you know how my mind works. It could take a couple of decades before before I'll go, I enjoy this, but what is going on? um but I finally looked up and realized the chronological order, and that just got me interested. And so that's what because and one morning I figured out, like, I was doing my late night research, I couldn't sleep. I finally figured out that the that the Discovery that we were watching beforehand was before everything else, and it kind of just blew me away. I'm like, "Oh, Brett." I waited till morning to tell him. I didn't wake him up, but I'm just like, "I'm gonna blow your mind." And I'm also probably ruining some of his geek cred, but he didn't put me right on this either. But so then I started at the chronological beginning and just to put it in order, and it's been really interesting. And so the the episode that I'm bringing tonight just keep in mind it's from somebody who hasn't watched tons who hasn't watched all of the series, who hasn't seen or at least doesn't remember all of the movies. But mostly I just picked it because it was a subject matter that I related to personally. So
So before we name the episode, I want to make sure I understand. So when you say you're taking things chronologically, you're talking about the timeline, the Star Trek timeline, not the production of the shows.
right, which was something that I debated in my head pretty seriously for a number of days. Like once I realized, okay, I want to dive in and do this. And I went with a chronological order just so that I could put things in order in my head.
That's I find that really interesting simply because those of us that have been longtime Star Trek fans could not do that. We couldn't come to it as fresh as you have and do the chronological time, the Star Trek timeline thing chronologically. We already we were already a little bit ahead of the game with the original series, and of course, Next Gen. I
Yeah.
mean, I can say that I've watched it in production chronology, but not timeline chronology. So that does probably give you a little different perspective on it.
Yeah, well, and I realize that'll give me a different perspective, and part of the reason for not doing that is I'm just always interested in what's going on, like what were the social things, what was going on socially that they were commenting on in different episodes. But the truth is, I wasn't watching them at the time that history was happening, so I'm going to need to look that up anyways. So, and
Yeah.
it's always when things are made later, then you know that when you go back and when you watch them chronologically, like what I'm watching right now was, of course, made after the original series and after um, Next Generation. But so you kind of have to keep that in mind. I don't know. It'll be interesting. We'll see how it works. I just,
Well, I can think of a few things, and I'm absolutely not going to mention any of them in the event that you haven't gotten there yet, because I don't want to spoil them for you. But the things that characters, races, um, conflicts, different things that longtime Star Trek fans were familiar with long before Enterprise was ever even in production.
yeah,
It was fun for us to go back, I think, and see some of that early on, and some of those things through the lens of a theoretically earlier time. Even
right.
though, as you said, Star Trek always has had a history of doing a bit of social commentary, for the time it is produced.
Yeah.
So there is that. So there are all these dimensions going on.
Yeah.
And with this, you picked season one, episode 4, which is called Strange New World.
Yeah.
And I again, it's always interesting to me, and I'm especially interested in those folks who pick an early episode in any series because we are still learning to know the crew, learning to know the personalities and all. And you especially, you can't have gone far enough into Enterprise yet to really probably have a feel for these characters, and yet for whatever reason, it struck you.
Yeah. Well, and I am a person that I really love the character development episodes. Like I love those parts of it and getting to know the characters. I'll if there has to, if there's too much action scenes for me, I'll get bored. It'll be the same as like I'll see Brett. He'll get bored if there's not enough moving forward of the plot and people are just talking to each other, getting to know each other. Whereas those are the ones where I'm just like, oh, this is a great episode. so, so I do know that about myself, and that's probably why. And since you first, since you first asked, and of course now I've watched more, and also even I had gotten much further into the series, um, since then, and also I've just been reading about it, and so I realized this is gonna be a strange pick. It's right at the beginning. It it's not known as one of those, turning points or one of those great episodes, but I still picked it because I just like it. And so I figured that's what this is about,
It's,
you know?
it's exactly what it's
Yeah,
about. And folks, we
yeah.
should probably mention too that we tend not to do recaps here because I always put a link to the episode entry in Memory Alpha. So if you need a little bit of a refresher, either go back and watch the episode, or check that link and you can get a summary of it and get a feel for it, and maybe it'll bring it back to you. And if it doesn't, then you should probably go rewatch it.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, there were a couple things that struck me early on in this episode that as I rewatched it again, it had that feel of almost a haunted, sitting around the campfire telling ghost stories. And then it shifted completely to something completely different, which it's an episode that takes you down one path and then flips over as far as the storyline.
Yeah, and it starts out, as you said, like, around the campfire, and there's kind of I think that's where a lot of, like, that getting to know the characters is coming in, um, and then especially, like, that conversation between Tucker mm, hold on. I'm looking at my cheat sheets because 'cause I'm terrible with names anyways, and when I get a little bit nervous, they all fly out of my head. Yeah, but so, Tucker and, Mayweather, and they're talking about their different childhoods, and, like, Tripp grew up in Florida, and Mayweather, of course, was the boomer who grew up in space, and so it doesn't go a great deal into those different backgrounds, but you get the sense of, "Oh, these folks are coming from such different places." And then you've got the opening shot with Elizabeth Cutler, the nerd studying the the book on to find out about the local bugs on the planet, and then later when they're fighting with the scorpion in the tent, that kinda comes back. Um, but you're right, it goes from this, like, kind of we're all taking a break camping situation to, um have to suspicion in the crew. Are they under attack by rock people? Quickly, you realize no, they've been inadvertently dosed by the um, hallucinogenic pollen that's on this planet, and just sort of watching that how they deal with it, um, being affected. And there's sort of T'Pol on one side and the rest of the crew on the other, and so there's a lot of highlighting of this, like the underlying mistrust of Vulcans to begin with, but you add a little bit of help with that paranoia and some unexplained phenomenon, and that's what it goes to really quickly. And so one of the things that I found, well, first of all, to the 2 different episodes, I did notice that it was framed really well when I rewatched it when they're around, just in terms of what it's saying about different perspectives. Like, even while they're around the campfire, there's that scene where they're looking up at the star, and, um, that's the sun. And so we have, like, okay, this is how far away we are from where we know, and yet there's all these things that are the same, which I sort of forgot about the first time until I'm like, "Oh, that was clever to that was clever to plant there." And then, of course, when we get to the end, and you've got that line about challenging your preconceptions, otherwise they'll challenge you. But, um, I just talked a whole bunch. Was there any you wanted to add before I went into
Well,
what?
from the production standpoint, the director and the producer are playing with you a little bit because you're not quite sure what is and is not real, because sometimes you're treated to a look at what the individual sees under the influence of the hallucinogenics, and the next time you're seeing it as a normal person would, where there
Yeah.
is nothing. So you're not 100% sure until they identify what's going on, what really is going on. And I like that, because it again it leaves that sense of, I'm not sure what I'm watching, and I'm not sure whose side I should be on. Is
Yeah.
is is Tripp, justified in his mistrust of DePaul, or is DePaul the right one? That she's seeing things objectively, like you would think a Vulcan would. So it's that back and forth, and then DePaul starts to have her own issues with the hallucinogenics, and
Hmm.
so you're never, until relatively late in the episode, you're not exactly sure what's going on or who really is doing what.
Right. I mean, there's like 3 separate realities there, There's the hallucinogenic reality there that we don't know if it's real or not. There's, the reality of the captain and back on, uh,
Like on the
yeah,
Enterprise.
yeah, the back at with Captain Archer back on the Enterprise, and then eventually you've got T'Pol, who's kind of in the middle of it, like, how much is she holding it together, how much isn't she? And she's kind of the wild card there. You're never quite, even if one of the things that I thought was interesting is, even after you know what's going on, you're never quite sure how how affected she is, if it's just hitting her differently. That great line of like, "Oh, I hope she knows the difference between stun and kill," and so they're like, none of the characters are sure either. It's like, this is the best guess, but she might not be able to take care of this. Um, and that really, I love storylines where we're let in on the fact that there's, like, wildly different points of view, to the extent that there's different realities. And I think part of this is just my background in facilitation, and specifically in conflict work, and conflict resolution work, and listening to I have very often in life had that perception of listening to people and realizing, like, okay, there's like a complete logic here. This is a complete reality that you're in, and this is 100% real. And there's another person who sees it, or another group even, who sees it very differently, and their sense of logic is just completely there, and what is the truth is like, well, it's someplace in between, or neither, or something other, it's those concepts are always really, I guess, if I didn't like thinking about them and sort of sitting with that for a lot of my life, then I wouldn't have done that work. But I love stories that present that, because I think it's a way, it's one of the ways we learn as human beings, is just like getting to hear good stories and trying on different things. Like, well, what would I do if if I knew this person was wrong and they were convinced I was trying to kill them?
The other one that struck me, and it's sort of not exactly a separate plot or storyline, but the crewman that they recovered, and Dr. Flock said, "Oh yeah, I can fix this, no problem," and it ends up almost killing the crewman. And the remorse of Dr. Phlox over, I could have done this, I should have, I didn't need to, there was no indication, but if I had, I might have known. And you see that back and forth, which that too is an interesting little examination of that character early in the series, because up to that point,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say he was cocky, but he was very confident. And all of a sudden,
Mhm.
you see him here in this role, and I think it's safe to say this for you. In subsequent episodes, he goes back to having that very strong sense of what he believes. Here, there was a whole lot of self-doubt involved in that this crewman is about to die, or he ended up not dying
Mhm.
happily, but um, it was, as you said, a very character developing moment.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and it's carrying that theme of, like, doubting or not doubting, right? Because, yeah, and I agree on the character development, and it's, you know, sort of the people that are in the position to be the sanest that are back on the, space or there's back on the Enterprise safe from all of this. They're the, it's the doctor that's able to have the mental capacity to have doubt and to wonder what, could he have done something? One interesting thing about that character is in an earlier draft of this show, um, the character that was beamed aboard, he didn't make it. Like he was going to be the first death, but and it was but they made a decision like that they didn't want to write him off and just have that death without the crew being able to deal with it and not being able to show that. But like the first drafts, he was like the red shirt that he just didn't make it.
Elle, you're becoming a real Star Trek fan, so you're
Yeah.
looking at earlier drafts and everything. I mean,
Well, no, I just read through some fan pages. I didn't actually look at the early draft.
yeah, but that's okay. I mean, that's good enough. You're becoming a real fan because honestly, that's not. I will do that occasionally, but I tend to take the episodes kind of as they are, and and go from there. Sure, once in a while, it's definitely fun to look at all alternatives, but I've never been that kind of fan that okay, I'm going to go back and look at every draft and see how this story started and how it ended up being produced. So congratulations, yeah, you're really
Yeah.
into it. It's great.
I'm just new at it. It's not that I'm not a fan.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't mean it that way, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I take your compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Um,
I mean, but what is it about? And I don't think it's just because you were doing this show here with me. There's something about Star Trek that does make you, it doesn't matter what angle, it makes you want to dig in a little more or watch more or learn a little more about the characters and the world of Star Trek and all. And it may be through, fan pages, it may be through uh, research into Gene Roddenberry's original vision, but
yeah.
there's something unusual and unique, I think, about Star Trek.
Yeah. I think so too. And I can see eh, I can see why it's like why a lot of people find themselves really diving in deep, especially if they have a personality where they like to dive in deep to things. Um, in terms of my path and kind of how I got here or got back to it after a just having Star Trek be more as something I like, but it was more of a on the periphery. I think it's just, and people from Max Stock will know this, but I'm just the last couple of years I've been dealing with multiple chemical sensitivities, which means that I'm like leaving the house, it puts me in a mask and I end up in I think I relate a lot to feeling like I'm in an alien environment. And it's it's actually been really useful. Like I love watching it from that perspective because it brings kind of that sense of adventure into my own life instead of just frustration, right? Um, but especially this episode where they're dealing with something that they didn't know was in the air that they're breathing. Like it seemed like a safe bet, this planet, the M class planet, which they actually named the planet. And I was going to, what is it, Minash?
Hmm. I
I'll get
honestly,
back to the regular. Sorry. Um, but that notion of just like thinking that you're safe and then suddenly having your thinking messed with and your emotional responses messed with is something that I just personally relate to. Um, now, of course, it's like chemical sensitivity and fragrance sensitivity, which is kind of a pain because, you know, it it sucks to be bothered that much or to, smell something and have like burning sensations. But it's also eh, talking with other people that go through this, I realize that in some ways it's a real blessing just because I know. And before that became an issue, I was just sick all the time. And so part of it, you realize, okay, well, there's something physical going on if I'm dizzy or if I have a really bad headache. But if I'm just suddenly really anxious or really angry or I can't think straight, that's not as, until I knew what was going on, that wasn't as obvious that I was just in trouble physically. It really seemed like it's this situation. I'm fine. This situation is terrible. And so, um, yeah, I just related to the episode that way. And it wasn't, I mean, just to be clear, I don't have hallucinations. And I'm not seeing rock people, but there were moments, in my relationship where I was very upset, and of course, I didn't realize it was me, and so it was the person in front of me, and then it would come, a day, a two, enough for it to pass and for me to be feeling better and to kind of come back to central again, and then I'd realize, oh, okay, here's like the small thing that I was kind of upset about that was really like a conversation of, hey, do you mind doing such and such? You don't know this, but that annoys me. That would have been easy, that instead turned into this huge thing. And, after I did know, I mean, this is why I was kind of interested in like to Paul's character too. Like she was affected by the hallucinogenics, but she was able to stay on board. I mean, she was able to be aware that she wasn't okay. And that's like this whole, you know, eh, that's a whole other space too. Like I remember, oh, there are quite a few times where I would realize like, okay, this is my nervous system. My body feels like it's upset. I don't, like real me probably isn't upset. I just need to go be by myself and let this pass. Like I just need to not be around people right now, which is a very sane way to think about it. But in those moments, what it actually felt was like, okay, this is one of those times I promised myself and others in this situation that I would just go be by myself. But when I was in the room, I would just feel like the moment I think straight, I'll figure out why this is their fault, and that's not usually me. And so like watching this and relating to like the paranoia that, to Paul was against them. And then also to Paul, like there's this interesting place where the captain, Archer, tries logicking he tries logic with Trip for as long as he can. And to Paul tries logic with Trip. No, that's not happening. Here's what's actually going on. Like, and there's kind of this, you trust me, like get back to the trust in me. I'm telling you, this isn't what's going on. And he's too far gone. He can't do it. And so they have to make the decision to like step out of like, we're trying to pull this person out of it into just like managing mode, like caretaking mode. And so that's where instead of trying to talk him out of it, they just like beautifully go deeper into his own story, but change it into something that's slightly workable. Like it's still a scary, terrible story in their version. Like either this last ditch effort works or I'm going to have to just blow you up from above. But Trip can accept that. Like, okay, we're going to do this. And it's enough to save it. I should also be clear that I've never had to be managed to quite that extent. quite that extent. there's there's
Yeah.
probably times when my loved ones have needed to like fend for themselves and get out of there. But like no one's had to do that kind of uh, caretaking for me to that extreme. But yeah,
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Archer's approach to dealing with the thing, one minute he's trying to convince him, no, this is not happening, it's not real. And then you're right, okay, that's not working. So it's almost a reverse psychology. All right, let's go with it. Let's
yeah,
just elaborate on it. Let's just make you're paranoid. All right, so let's just make you, well, maybe not more paranoid, but just go with that. And he does reach Trip to some degree, at least enough to, Trip is not phasering everybody. So they're just, yeah, once again, if you look at this and you can just watch it as an enjoyable episode, an early episode of Enterprise, or you can realize that there are a lot more things happening here that and a lot of we go back to the character development,
yeah,
because does Trip obviously has this deep mistrust of Vulcans because of them restricting the warp drives and what humans should do,
yeah.
and
Oh,
that amplifies it.
yeah. I actually have a question for you about that
Okay.
since you're as someone who's watched all of Star Trek. Was that because I'm really enjoying the history of Vulcans and Earth and where and kind of learning about that mistrust and like how that happened and like that Vulcan. So did you know some of this beforehand when you were watching other series? Was this explained? Like, did you know that Vulcan history, or is this new for everybody watching it?
This part is pretty new for everyone. Well, okay, so by the time this came out, yeah, you would have had a little Vulcan history, but not this much. I mean, first contact with the Vulcans, and all that. I'd have to go back and look at the exact chronology, but we Star Trek fans would have known some of this, but not in the kind of detail that the first few episodes of Enterprise give us.
Yeah,
As the part that Vulcans played in improving our spacefaring and taking us out beyond the solar system. So that was, I mean, it was an interesting way to start out Enterprise. And I don't think we're spoiling any of the first few episodes, but there's a lot more there of the explanation, and the fact that the Vulcans would probably rather not have humans blundering out the way they felt they were, but we humans tend to do that.
yeah,
And so that, and of course that just sets up the rest of the series.
yeah. Well, and that there's that tension between Captain Archer and T'Pol too. Like, and she's you know, she's counseling a more reasoned, like, let's check this planet out a little bit more carefully, like, let's go down. And he's just like, we're not here to tiptoe around. And I'm just thinking, like, oh, that's like, listening to that today, it's just like a little cringeworthy to hear him coming across like as that much of like just a cowboy out there, you know? But um, it's clear that she's not thinks that he could probably tiptoe a little bit more.
Well,
But
not only that, but it's quite a bit different than I think subsequent series where there is a much more measured approach. I mean, so
yeah,
first of all, we're going down in a pod. We're not transporting down.
yeah,
Second, yeah, we just walk right out. Now, obviously, there have been some studies done so that the atmosphere is not poisoned, so that's fine. The one thing that bothered me that kind of took me out of it a bit is like, really, you took your dog with you?
yeah, yeah. As a pet owner, that really bugs me.
Well, not as a pet owner. So I mean, I can take it both ways. First of all, yeah, you're endangering the dog. Second, you're contaminating the planet
Oh,
potentially.
I see what you're saying, that he took the dog to the planet. I was
Yeah.
just bugged that he's on the spaceship in the first
Oh well,
place.
that's one of those things. I mean, hey, in the next generation, Data had a cat, so what? But
Yeah, but cats, that's different.
oh brother,
They're people. No, I'm just kidding.
let's not go there. Let's not go there. We're both going to get ourselves in trouble. But because I mean, I have no objection to cat or dog on a starship if that's if that.
Okay. Yeah.
But just the fact that you would take it on the mission to a planet that you don't know anything about and let the dog run loose. I mean,
Yeah.
as far as indigenous hostile animals, and what may be okay for humans, or humans would be cautious about, a dog doesn't have a clue. And
Yeah.
so that was a little surprising, but I think it did indicate a little carelessness. But then again, these are earlier days in the Star Trek timeline of space exploration, and so maybe they took things a little more at face value. They hadn't gotten burned enough, and this may be one of the first times they got burned, and they'll be
Yeah.
hopefully more cautious next time.
Yeah. Well, and it's well, I've gotten far enough in the series to know this isn't the only time the dog gets well, the dog does eventually get into some trouble, but um, but yeah, I'm really enjoying getting to find out kind of a little bit of the history of how some of these procedures um, get set up in the first place, and maybe why the patient had gone out without a few of them. And yet I don't want to, as much as that, just like Captain Archer's attitude sometimes can get, and Trip's attitudes can sometimes get a little cringeworthy for me. I also really love just that it's such an adventure. Like, I just imagine I mean, it would always take, for me, just, like, a lot of bravery, I think, to, like, decide to live your life on a spaceship and go explore new worlds, but, um, the fact that they're willing to do it with so little history behind them and, like, not really having procedure to fall back on, not really knowing what they're doing, they're just kind of out doing stuff, you know?
Well,
And
you're
yeah,
right. It's a frontier. It's a
yeah,
complete frontier in a way that the original series, it wasn't quite that way. It definitely wasn't quite that way in the Next Generation. Things were definitely a lot more measured by the Next Generation. Again, we're
sure.
talking about the Star Trek timeline,
Right.
um, the Star Trek universe timeline.
Yeah.
So it's because you're right. There are things as far as procedures, as far as attitudes and everything about alien species that you don't see in the other series. And I think that was
Yeah.
by design, but it still
Yeah.
works. It works if you understand, to your point, if you understand where you are in the timeline and kind of why you are there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it works for me. I'm excited to watch more and to keep keep reading into it.
Well, I'm so glad you picked this one because to be honest with you, I would not have picked it, but you made me go back and look at it again, and it kind of just reinforces my feeling that there really are no bad Star Trek episodes. There's some that are better than others. There's some that resonate with more people, but they're all really worthy of watching and
Yeah.
looking at character development. And you're accepting that these are real people, and of course they're not. They're actors in
Yeah.
a TV series, but at the same time, it's open your front door and walk out and talk to your neighbor, and there's some character
Yeah.
development going on there, I'm sure. So yeah.
Definitely. Have you met my neighbors? No.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've got good neighbors, but I know some people in my life that are undergoing character development.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I love characters, so I didn't mean that. I
Yeah, no,
doubt my neighbors are gonna be listening to this, but if they do, I love
yeah,
them. They're great.
yeah. So, Elle, where can people find you if they would like to communicate with you about your pick and about your thoughts on Star Trek? Anywhere that you want to share, or do you want to go and hide?
No, I I welcome it. I feel like I people might reach out and school me that this was a beginner's pick, but that's what it was meant to be, right?
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm at all of the books, Facebook, Twitter, uh, Instagram, Twitter. It's do you want these in show notes, or do you want me to just to rattle them off?
I'll rattle them off and I'll put them in the show notes too.
Okay. Well, Twitter is Elle Marine at twitter.com. Facebook and Instagram are Elle Newman. Maureen is my middle name. I don't know why I decided to do that one differently. I just did. Who knew that Twitter was going to take off so many years ago when I signed that up? Yeah.
Okay, good.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Chuck. This was so fun. And
well, I appreciate you putting yourself out there, because I know that you weren't 100% comfortable when we talked about it, because you almost tried to disqualify yourself. It's like, no, you're exactly the kind of person that I want, that you bring a different angle to it, a completely different angle, and the fact that you found something this early in your watching that really struck you is, I think, it's a tribute to the writing and the diversity of storytelling that Star Trek brings to all of us.
Yeah, it's just awesome writing.
Yeah. Well, I hope you will come back again, pick another episode when you're a little farther down the timeline, and we'll do it again.
I hope you do ask me back. If I might have to redeem myself, but once I get further on, but no.
No redeeming. No.
Yeah. No, I would love to. That would be fun to have those little marks.
All right.
Yeah.
And we will do it again. It again.
Great.
Folks, this is Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner. I hope you got something out of this, because I know I did. Once again, Elle let me see something through her eyes that I really hadn't seen in the episode, even though I thoroughly enjoyed the rewatch of the episode from my angle. So we'd like to know what you think. So you can contact Elle at all the places she talked about. You can find Trek Favorites on Facebook or Twitter, and you can find me as Chuck at TrekFavorites.com in email. Let us know what you think. Until the next time, thanks for joining us. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.